My in-laws left me with my bedridden, mute sister-in-law, Callista, and took off to Hawaii for a vacation. Just before leaving, my husband Bowden said, "Taking care of her is your responsibility. Don't slack off." As soon as Bowden and his family left, Callista surprised me by sitting up and saying, "All right, let's get going too." My name is Avalini, and I'm 27 years old. When I was younger, I had big dreams of becoming a pop star, but reality soon hit, and by the time I was in my late 20s, I had let go of that ambition. I met Bowden through a mutual friend and started dating him because, well, my mom kept asking me when she was going to have a grandchild. Bowden and I hit it off, especially when I learned that he too had dreamed of being in the entertainment industry when he was younger. Now, Bowden works for a prestigious trading company headquartered in Manhattan. As for me, I worked at a bank after college, but I quit when we got married. One day, we went to visit Bowden's parents. He has a younger sister, Callista, who suffered from encephalitis as a child. It started with what everyone thought was a regular fever, but when it didn't go away, the doctor diagnosed her with a brain inflammation caused by the flu. Sadly, by the time they realized it, it was too late. The fever had caused brain damage, leaving Callista unable to speak and bedridden. Since then, her mother has been her primary caretaker. Oddly enough, Callista and I got along well from the beginning. Although she couldn't speak, she used sign language to communicate, and after a while, I naturally learned it too. I remember one day, I playfully signed to her. "We're like best friends who've known each other forever, right?" She smiled and signed back, "Yes, let's stay close friends forever." I happily signed back, "Of course we will." But her mother, my mother-in-law, was the total opposite of Callista. She was always sarcastic and critical of me. We lived in a condo about 30 minutes away from Bowden's family home, but that didn't stop my mother-in-law from dropping by unexpectedly. Each time she visited, she would find something to criticize. "Botany's shoes are a mess. You know, a man's shoes say a lot about his job. It's your duty to make sure they're clean," she'd scold. For some reason, she always called him Botany, like he was still a child. "Make sure you fold the laundry neatly. If you don't, Botany will be in a bad mood. And remember, never go to bed before Botany, even if he says it's okay." Bowden, when we were dating and even in the early stages of our marriage, was kind and considerate. If I wasn't feeling well and asked to eat out, he would agree without hesitation. If I had my eye on a designer handbag, he'd surprise me with it a month later. But about a year into our marriage, Bowden started to change. Or maybe he just went back to how he truly was. He started coming home late, reeking of alcohol. He claimed work was keeping him busy, even on weekends, and stopped inviting me to visit his parents' house with him, which I found strange. One day, I confronted him. "Bowden, you've been so distant lately. You barely talk to me anymore. It feels like you're not the same person." He glared at me for a second, then coldly replied, "That's not true. You're overthinking things." I wasn't about to let it go that easily. "I don't think I am. You've changed, Bowden." But he shut the conversation down with, "Stop bringing this up." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there, confused and hurt. So when Bowden suddenly announced one day, "I'm going to my parents' house this Sunday. What are you going to do?" I was surprised. He had been going there alone for months. I quickly asked, "Can I come too this time?" He sighed and said, "That's why I'm asking." Of course, I jumped at the chance to go. "I'd love to. I've missed Callista." Bowden didn't seem too thrilled about that, and I noticed a faint grimace when I mentioned his sister. "Yeah, you and Callista seem to get along really well, huh?" he said. "We do. It feels like we've been best friends forever," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. On Sunday, we made the drive to his family's home in Nebraska. We even stopped at a bakery to pick up some pastries for his mother. She was always hard to please, but pastries usually did the trick. When we arrived, Bowden's mom greeted us, her face scrunched up the moment she saw me. Clearly not happy I had come along. "Mother-in-law, I brought some pastries for you," I said, handing them over. She grabbed the box, peeked inside, and with a dismissive tone said, "Oh, these again? They're getting boring, but if you insist, I'll have them." Her face then lit up, like a child getting a new toy. "Is father here?" Bowden asked. His dad was still working despite being quite elderly. No, he's at a meeting. Why, did you need something? She replied. Not really, just had something to talk to him about, Bowden answered. I hadn't heard anything about this conversation Bowden wanted to have with his father, so I asked, Did you have something important to discuss? Bowden shot me a look and said, It's none of your business. What do you mean? We're married. Of course, it's my business. I argued. But before Bowden could respond, his mother cut in. Exactly. If Bowden doesn't want to share something with you, then stop prying. Knowing it was pointless to argue with her, I kept quiet. Just then, Callista appeared at the doorway, and seeing Bowden, she smiled. Oh, Bowden, you're here? Bowden surprised me one day by suggesting a family trip to Hawaii. How about you, sis? He asked Callista, his bedridden and mute sister. She shrugged and replied, I'll pass. I don't have a passport. I was caught off guard. Bowden was always so tied up with work, so it was strange to hear him planning a vacation. Bowden, is everything okay at your job? I asked, still puzzled by the sudden plan. Everything's fine. I wouldn't be suggesting this if work wasn't going well, he replied, a little annoyed. His mother, who always seemed displeased with me, glared and added her 2 cents. You shouldn't meddle in Bowden's decisions. You're being too nosy. Then Bowden dropped a bombshell. Actually, Evelini, the real reason I brought you here is because I want you to take care of Callista while we're on vacation. I was taken aback for a moment, but quickly realized that staying with Callista would be much better than being stuck in Hawaii with my mother-in-law. Okay, I'll take care of Callista. I agreed, though it stung a bit that Bowden hadn't even considered me for the trip. But you didn't need to drag me here just to tell me that. Well, Bowden said, I figured if I told you in front of my mother, you'd be less likely to resist. He knew I would probably be upset about not going to Hawaii, and his mother would back him up if I tried to argue. It was clear they had planned this together, and I felt a bit cornered. After the conversation ended, I made my way to Callista's room. She was lying on the bed, but beamed when she saw me. It's been a while. How have you been? She signed to me. I'm good. I signed back. Bowden asked me to come over today, though it's strange because for months now, he's been visiting without me. Callista's face grew serious. My brother is always hiding something. He's never been the open type, she signed. She then mentioned how Bowden and the rest of the family were planning a trip to Hawaii. I'm staying behind, though, she added, with a grin that suggested she was perfectly okay with it. We continued chatting, and I enjoyed our time together. I always wondered why Callista and her mother were so different, and now it started to make sense. A few hours later, Bowden came to collect me, and we headed home. As I left, Callista gave me a sly wink and hinted at something bigger, saying, I'll tell you soon. Fast forward to the day of the Hawaii trip. Bowden and I went to his parents' house, but while the rest of the family was packing for their flight, I was getting ready to stay with Callista for the week. I brought my luggage to Callista's room, and she greeted me with excitement. It's happening, she signed with a playful grin. When I came back to the living room, Bowden's family was preparing to leave. His voice rose above everyone else's as he reminded me, taking care of Callista is your responsibility. Don't slack off. Even my mother-in-law chimed in, be sure to get along well with Callista. It's better for you to stay here anyway. Then she added something that made me bite my tongue. If anything happens to Callista, it'll be all your fault. We'll hold you accountable. I couldn't believe the audacity of a family leaving their disabled daughter behind for a vacation while blaming me for anything that could go wrong. But I said nothing and walked back to Callista's room, not wanting to deal with them any longer. The moment I stepped inside, Callista sprang up from her bed with more energy than I'd ever seen. Come on, let's get going, she said, breaking the silence I had grown so used to. I froze, my mind racing. What? I managed to say, completely shocked. Callista chuckled. I told you I can actually walk. And I can talk too. Since when? I asked, still in disbelief. Since last year, I think, she replied casually. Why have you been hiding it from everyone? With a calm expression, Callista began to explain everything. Actually, there's something you don't know. My father and mother are both remarried. I'm my dad's child from his first marriage, and my brother and sister are from my mom's side. Suddenly, so much made sense. Her mother's coldness, the way she was treated like a burden. It all clicked. I had a feeling, I admitted. Yeah, Callista continued. Mom can't stand me, and I didn't want to deal with her, so I pretended I couldn't talk or walk. But Dad knows everything. He's always been on my side. As I processed what she was saying, Callista dropped another bombshell. That's why I've decided we're going to Hawaii too. What? I asked, completely confused. You mean today? Yup. We'll even be staying at the same resort as Bowden and his family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wait, I'd love to go with you, Callista, but do you even have a passport? Of course. I secretly got my passport last month. And don't worry about money. Dad is paying for everything. Our flights, the resort, even your ticket. I was floored. I see. I guess we're really going to Hawaii then. And that's how we ended up where we are now. Callista and I took a taxi to the airport, and when we arrived, her father was waiting to see us off. Avelini, I know this must be a shock, but I hope you enjoy the trip, he said kindly. Thank you, I replied, still a bit overwhelmed by everything. I feel bad that you're covering all the costs. Don't worry about it, he reassured me. As long as you two have a good time, I'm happy. With that, we boarded our plane, on a different airline from Bowden's family, of course, and arrived in Hawaii early the next morning. We checked into the resort hotel, where Callista and I shared a room, both of us bubbling with excitement for the adventure ahead. I casually mentioned to Callista, "Your father seems to have traveled a lot." "Yeah, he's been on many international business trips, even to Hawaii a few times," she responded. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, curious about what she had in mind. Callista smirked. "I'm guessing my mom and everyone will be dining at the restaurant tonight. I think it's time for a little surprise." I chuckled, excited at the thought. That sounds like fun. We should get some rest first, though. We've both got some jet lag to shake off. That's a good idea, Callista agreed. I couldn't sleep a wink on the plane. We showered and climbed into bed, quickly drifting off into a much-needed sleep. By the time we woke up, it was late afternoon, close to 4 o'clock. Callista was already up, putting on makeup, when I stirred awake. "Sorry, I slept too long," I apologized. "No worries, I just woke up too," Callista reassured me. We both needed it. Now we're fully charged and ready for battle. Around 7 o'clock, I told Callista, "I'll head down to the restaurant to check things out." I snuck down to the restaurant, staying hidden in the shadows near the entrance as I scanned the room for Bowden and his family. There they were, sitting joyfully at a table in the far corner. I moved a little closer to get a better view and noticed something shocking. A young woman was with them, someone I didn't recognize. This woman wasn't there when they left Bowden's parents' house, and I nearly gasped aloud in disbelief. As I strained to hear their conversation, I could make out parts of what Bowden and my mother-in-law were saying. "I'm glad it's not that woman tonight," my mother-in-law muttered. "I really drew the short straw with her. She's tainted our family." Bowden's voice followed, dripping with disdain. "I want to divorce her and start over. I'll find a reason, and I'll squeeze every penny I can out of her." My mother-in-law added, "Even if you don't have a solid reason, we can fabricate one. She's such a bad match. I wish I could just throw her in the trash." They continued talking, and it was clear they were planning to rid themselves of me, all while celebrating with this mysterious woman. I fought the urge to confront them right then and there, and instead retreated back to our room, my heart racing with anger. When I got back, Callista looked up at me. That took a while. "What happened?" she asked, noticing my pale face. "I saw something shocking," I whispered, still processing what I had heard. "Bowden brought a woman I've never seen before, and they were talking about divorcing me." Callista gasped. "What? That's awful." I nodded, though a strange calm settled over me. Honestly, I feel relieved. Now that I've seen him with someone else, I'm ready to move on. I can finally divorce him. Callista grinned. "That's a good thing. So, shall we go make our entrance?" With a mischievous smile, we headed to the restaurant. We asked to be seated near Bowden's table, and the hostess found us a spot close enough to hear everything. They were still deeply engrossed in their conversation, unaware of our presence. The insults about me continued, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at how endlessly they could badmouth me. Callista caught my eye and gave me a nod, our signal to begin the counterattack. I stood up and walked directly to their table, my voice loud and clear. "Are you all having a good time?" The shock on Bowden's face was priceless. His mouth dropped open, and my mother-in-law's eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, they were completely frozen. Finally, my mother-in-law broke the silence. "What are you doing here? And how is Callista here, without a wheelchair?" Callista stood up with a confident smile. "I don't need a wheelchair anymore." The room seemed to stand still as they processed her words. Bowden and his mother stared at Callista in stunned silence. "Thanks to you," Callista continued with a sharp smile, "I've regained my ability to walk and talk. I must have caused you so much trouble for all these years, but I'm fine now." When did you start talking again?" My mother-in-law stammered, her face turning pale. "Maybe about a year ago," Callista answered casually. "Why didn't you tell us?" Bowden asked, still in shock. "Because it was easier for me if you all thought I was still mute," Callista said bluntly. "And besides, I heard what you were saying about Avellini." My mother-in-law's face turned as white as a sheet. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to backtrack. "We weren't saying anything bad about you, Avellini," Bowden tried to lie. "Oh, really?" I said, pulling out my phone. "Because I recorded everything. Would you like to hear it?" Bowden's face twisted in anger. "Avellini, you've caused me nothing but trouble. Now you're making these ridiculous accusations." I met his anger with cold resolve. "Once we get back, I'll be contacting my lawyer to start the divorce process. And you can't deny what you've done. You're on vacation with another woman, plotting to divorce me. Plus, you called marrying me a bad lottery ticket. So, I expect you to compensate me for that insult." My mother-in-law, realizing they had been caught, tried to change her tune. "Avellini, dear, I've always liked you. Let's try to work this out with Bowden. This woman means nothing to him." I wasn't having it. "I'm sorry, but I can't live with a man who sees me as a bad lottery ticket. Enjoy your time with this woman. And don't be surprised if I seek compensation from her too." The other woman, now pale and trembling, looked terrified. Bowden, desperate, fell to his knees. "Avellini, please don't make a big deal out of this. My company has strict policies." I shook my head, unimpressed by his plea. "You don't sound sorry at all." I stood firm and replied to Bowden, who was visibly shaken, but he wasn't giving up just yet. "Avellini, I beg you, please forgive me. If my company finds out, I'll lose my job," he pleaded, desperation lacing his voice. Though his panic was clear, I remained unmoved. "You should have thought about that before," I said coldly. "You are married, yet here you are in Hawaii with another woman. I will never forgive you." Upon hearing my harsh words, my mother-in-law collapsed to her knees beside Bowden, her tears flowing freely. "Please, Avellini, forgive my son," she begged, her voice trembling with emotion. By now, the entire restaurant was watching us. The scene we were making was drawing attention, and the manager began to approach our table. I stood up, not wanting to continue the spectacle. "Callista and I will head back to our room now. You all enjoy the rest of your Hawaiian vacation," I said coolly. "I suppose things will get a little more complicated when you return home." Bowden, now sobbing uncontrollably, shouted, "Please forgive me. I can't afford to pay any compensation." His outburst caused the restaurant manager to frown. The manager said something to a nearby staff member and then politely but firmly told Bowden that he was disturbing the other guests and needed to leave. Bowden, still in shock, didn't seem to understand the message, and soon 2 large security guards appeared. Without much effort, they hauled Bowden out of the restaurant. Though Bowden struggled and cried, he was no match for their strength. My mother-in-law and the other woman sat frozen, their expressions a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. Callista and I exchanged surprised glances at how things had escalated, but I couldn't help but feel that Bowden had gotten exactly what he deserved. A week later, Callista and I returned home. I heard that Bowden had been released shortly after being thrown out of the restaurant, but He had stayed in a state of shock for the rest of the trip, keeping to himself. It didn't bother me in the least. The very next day after getting back, I visited a law firm where an old friend from college worked. Unfortunately, my friend wasn't there, but I was assigned a female lawyer who was easy to talk to. I explained everything that had happened, the infidelity, the lies, and the hurtful comments. After listening carefully, she assured me that divorce was not only possible, but that I could also claim alimony from Bowden. She also said she would investigate the woman who had been with Bowden in Hawaii to see if I could claim compensation from her as well. A month later, the lawyer contacted me with the news. It was proven that Bowden had been seeing the other woman for about 6 months. This made it possible for me to seek alimony from her too. Without hesitation, I asked my lawyer, "Please, get as much alimony as you can from both Bowden and that woman." She smiled and gave me a reassuring nod. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized, and soon after, a hefty sum of alimony from both Bowden and his mistress was deposited into my account. As I looked at the amount, I couldn't help but mutter, "Well, that's karma for calling me a blank lottery ticket." 3 months later, out of the blue, Bowden and my mother-in-law appeared at my door. To my surprise, they both looked gaunt, having lost a significant amount of weight. Their once confident, arrogant faces were now worn and haggard. I opened the door just enough to ask, "What do you want?" "I have no desire to see either of you." Bowden's voice was weak as he replied, "I'm sorry, Avellini. Could you lend me some money? I lost my job and the woman she left me. I don't even have enough for food." My mother-in-law, looking equally defeated, chimed in softly, "I've divorced my husband too. I'm broke. Please, Avellini, we're begging you." She was in tears, but it didn't stir any sympathy in me. I crossed my arms and responded without a hint of emotion. "Too bad. I have absolutely no obligation to help either of you. Even if I did, I wouldn't lift a finger. Now leave." They stood there for a moment, speechless, before shuffling away. After they left, I grabbed a large handful of salt and sprinkled it across the doorway to cleanse my home of their bad energy. It felt like a final step in closing the door to that part of my life for good.